Hello, everyone. Welcome again to my podcast. We have a special guest today because it's a special topic. I actually squeezed her in because, as you know, I record in advance, and I fortunately have great guests coming up. But I did think that it was important. I was contacted by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and they offered me a great guest for the podcast, and I said yes because she wanted to talk about the holidays and how much most of us struggle with it, especially after a few years of not having all these gatherings and COVID and all of that. And I know that many of you, my dear listeners, you are struggling already or you are anticipating a lot of struggles. So I thought, okay, I think it's totally worth it to squeeze her in. And I'm sure with her credentials, she's the vice president of mission engagement at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention with a doctorate in counseling psychology from Georgia State University. So I'm sure you have a lot to share. Let's just jump right in. Some of them, Doreen, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you for
Thanks for
being.
having me.
Yes, and we know that for some people, this may be even the first gathering, and I mean large gathering. Because I think last year we were kind of warming up. Some people were still afraid, and this may be the first year that we're going to see friends, and we have coworkers and parties and family, which can bring a lot of stress. So, is it possible to avoid the stress? I mean, what are the tips that you have for those who are now anticipating that?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing we should acknowledge is that any change brings stress. So even the good parts of the holiday season can bring stress for us, even though we may be looking forward to them. And I think the first thing is maybe for people to think about not overextending themselves or overscheduling themselves. Like you said, I think many people want to kind of get back to their usual traditions or feel like they've missed out on some things the last few years. And so making sure that you're not overdoing it, but that you're really kind of taking stock of like how much am I scheduling? How much can I manage all of this? Because I think many of us are eager to get back to things and just making sure we're not overdoing it. And then I think the other thing you said, which is important, is that for many of us, family gatherings, are something we may look forward to, and they may also be stressful. Uh,
Mhm.
Particularly if there's, differences within a family or differing viewpoints that might become a topic of conversation around the dinner table. I think it's important to just kind of go into those with realistic expectations, so maybe the goal of them is to just enjoy the day and not to, convince a relative of a certain viewpoint or to even get into a debate, but really to just find a way to go in and appreciate that there are differences, but that we can still enjoy the day together.
Yeah. I was thinking you're talking, and I'm thinking that sometimes, because I know that for some of us, we want to host, we want people to come to our homes, and then we get, no, I'll make everything. And you just bring maybe a bottle of wine. And then, as you said, you overdo it, right? So
Mhm.
share responsibilities with, even if you're hosting, I mean, make sure that you set that kind of boundary, right? That helps.
Yeah, we talk a lot at the organization where I work about reaching out for help. And,
Hmm.
that's in big ways, certainly when you're struggling with your mental health or feeling unusually sad or depressed around the holidays, it's important to
Hmm.
reach out for help. But it's also important to ask for help around things like you just said, sharing responsibilities. Not, I think many of us have this kind of perfect idea of what we wanted, how we want to entertain, say, for a holiday. And really making sure that you're being realistic, but also that you're sharing the things, like you said, inviting people to help. I think a lot of people do want to help, but they don't know exactly how. And whether that's about a gathering or about our mental health, I think it's
Hmm.
important to invite people in to help, but also to be specific about what the best way for them to help.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and even the hosting thing, because I'm saying this because in Brazil we have the same, it's very similar culture in terms of what you do. You have the dinner with the turkey, and even the food is very similar. And there's always someone who hosts, and you come to their house. But I find here that every time I talk to someone, say, "Oh, so what are the plans for the holidays?" The first thing they mention is the stress. It really has become a stressful thing, it sounds, uh, for Americans, because maybe that's it, because you overdo it and you want everything to be perfect, you want to host, and they will say, "Oh my God, so much. I'm going to have the family, everybody's coming, and I have to do this." And it's like a checklist of things. When you talk about the holidays, it's a checklist, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I
I
think we
wonder if that's
also
cultural. What do you think?
I think it can be, but I think that's also informed by, images we see in media. We talk about the Hallmark holidays, right? Where
Yeah, the
it's like
perfection.
the perfection, and I think it can lead many of us, to have added pressure of those expectations. So I think this idea of going in realistically, allowing yourself some grace and compassion for what doesn't go well. I think
Mhm,
a lot of times, we take it on ourselves when things don't go exactly as planned, and
mhm,
really allowing ourselves some grace and compassion, self compassion,
mhm,
because that might not go perfect. Um,
mhm.
I
Yeah.
mention I live in the eastern United States, and right now, we're entering winter where days are getting shorter, and so, there's less sunlight, and all of those
Mhm,
can also have an impact on our mood in addition to the stress and the other things we're talking about. So I think the other piece is just making sure we're taking good care of ourselves and not letting the stress get the best of us. So getting out
mhm,
walk during daylight hours, making sure we're getting reasonable sleep and regular sleep. There's a temptation,
mhm.
I think, to stay up later or to go to events that keep us, throw us off our regular sleep rhythms. And those things are important when it comes to kind of being able to manage stress and take care of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. What about people? I mean, we surround ourselves again. There's a lot of pressure, as you said, the Hallmark thing. You're going to meet all your friends, and then you see your coworkers. You have the office party, and then the family party. But one of the things that I often think about is, who do I want to surround myself with during the holidays? Because that's very important. Sometimes, that difficult person that brings up a lot of can be triggering for you. Maybe that's not the best time of the year to see them.
Yeah, and I think many of us are weighing kind of what our sense of obligation or what we feel we're obligated to do. So
Hmm.
I what I say to folks is, if you're unsure about an activity for the holidays, it's okay to go into it, but also to have a backup plan or an escape plan. So, like, if you're at an event and there's someone at the event that you've had a difficult relationship with, if you find that it starts to feel tense for you, to have a way to gracefully kind of remove yourself from the situation. So, whether that's
Hmm.
going for a walk, uh, offering to run an errand for someone, that may need that for the host of the event, or really just finding a way to step away or leave the situation. I think it's important to have those and to have
Hmm.
some predictability around that, because I think a lot of people agree to gatherings out of a sense of obligation, and really thinking about, well, where's my boundary? Where do I feel safest? And how can
Hmm.
I protect that if things get difficult or if the situation starts to feel unsafe?
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I was thinking is saying no. It's so hard because we get so many invitations. And I remembered a guest that I had, and she was talking about how she deals with her mental health, and she listens to her needs, and she's very good about that. But one tip that she gave me that I never forgot, so I'm so gonna use that, is that, Paula, we get a lot of invitations, my husband and I. So, and I can't, it's really tough to say no, right? Because these are friends who want to see you, who want you to come to their homes. So every time I'm not sure, I just say, you know what? I am not sure right now. Let me just get back at you. I'll get back at you about that. It's much easier for later on to just send a message and say, "I'm so sorry." Then talking to them to say, "No, I don't want to go," but
Yeah.
to find an excuse, but just say, "I'll get back to you about that.
Yeah.
Let me just check."
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is exactly right. Creating some space for yourself around those situations
Mhm.
that even when they're good, even when they're things we want to do in the moment may feel like more pressure. And
Mhm.
allowing ourselves to kind of take stock of everything we have going on, not just because I think that's the other thing. In a moment, it may feel
Mhm.
like the right thing to do, but then when you look at everything else that's happening, it may start to feel like it's too much. And so creating some space for yourself uh,
Mhm.
those decisions and to do them with your well-being in mind is important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk my audience, Doreen, just so you understand. I have two main audiences. One are the people who are struggling maybe with suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts, or have had attempts in the past and they struggle with mental health. And the other part of my audience are people who lost loved ones by suicide. So, what do you have to say to this population, those who are now struggling because they miss their loved ones?
Yeah, well, and I too have been personally impacted by suicide,
Mhm.
so I understand the feeling of the holidays can bring up a lot of different feelings about who's not with us.
Yeah.
Um, and suicide loss does bring with it, some I think unique feelings that may not be there if the person died in other ways. This is really a time, I think, to find a balance between acknowledging that, your loved one was an important part of your life and that the holidays may not be exactly the same without your loved one, but that there's also ways we can acknowledge um, the relationship or their presence. So, I know people who've done different kind of rituals. They might, for those that say put up a Christmas tree, they might put a special ornament on that reminds them of the person, or display a
Mhm.
picture in their home so that the person, their memory is present with the family. A picture of a happier time, for example. But I think the important thing is to not go into the holiday with these expectations, but a realization that it may be different without your loved one, and to know that you don't have to decide for every holiday going forward how it's going to be. Particularly for people who the loss is newer or has happened more recently. This holiday season may not feel very celebratory at all,
Mhm.
and recognize that that's okay, that there's no right or wrong way to grieve, and that to do whatever you need to do this year to take care of yourself, but to recognize that it may be different next year or the year after that, and to just take those holidays as they.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Find the balance, right? Because again, you're going to be invited to parties and gatherings. So, but listen to yourself. What is your need? Maybe your need is to just stay by yourself. Finding this balance is really tough, but only you know what your needs are.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is that, finding places throughout the holiday season and people with whom we can talk about our loss, with whom we can say our loved one's
Hmm.
name. I think these are important. And while that may not be every person we're with or every gathering, to find those places where we can do that. Because I think it allows us to go into the holiday season recognizing our grief, but also recognizing that we can share our grief and also share memories about the person we lost. And so finding safe places to do that, I think, is also important.
Hmm. I love that you mentioned rituals because I think in our culture there is this idea that death has a time, grief has a time, and then you're supposed to get over it. And some people just no get rid of all the memories, and that's not really helpful, as we know, right?
Yeah, and I think that for some reason there's more pressure around that sometimes when the death has been by a suicide. It's almost like, we want to see the person who's grieving kind of, we want to make sure they're okay. And so we may put a stricter timeline on their grief, right? That we haven't that they're going to bounce back quickly. But what we should recognize is that any kind of loss is grief, right? A
Hmm.
suicide loss is just as much a grief experience as other kinds of loss. and to allow people the grace they need and the space they need um, to express that grief however they need to.
Yeah. And maybe I'm just thinking here. So if you do decide to go somewhere and feel comfortable, talk to the host and say, listen, this is what's happening to me. I may show up, I may not, but just be honest about the possibilities, right? I mean, I can't show up and just stay for a few minutes. I just wanted to know that this is how I'm feeling, what's going on in my life. So being open so that they even know what to expect and they don't put extra pressure on you.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting because some loss survivors may kind of find themselves waking up on the day and actually wanting to engage
Mhm.
with other
Yeah.
people. Whereas, everybody grieves differently. And so I think having some sort of plan, but also, like you're saying, being open and honest that if the day comes and it doesn't feel like the right thing, that you have a way of either not going through with it or going through with it maybe and leaving if it feels
Mhm.
like too much, and I think sometimes communicating that in advance to a host who knows and who
Mhm.
cares would be helpful because you can tell them, look, I may if I leave quietly, no, I'm okay, no, it's just I've done as much as I feel comfortable doing today.
Mhm. Yeah. Doreen, one last group of people, because this is a question that I get very often, through emails and messages, is how can I approach if I see that I have a friend or a loved one, someone I know who is struggling or struggling with mental illnesses or just struggling, period. How do I approach them? Because we have this idea of privacy, right? It's really hard to approach, and you don't want to invade their privacy, but at the same time you see that they're struggling during this time. So what is the best way to approach?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First, if you're wondering if someone is struggling, you should know that it's okay to ask them directly if they're having thoughts of suicide. I think there's kind of a belief that if we ask, we're somehow going to make the situation worse. And the reality is there's no evidence to support that. In fact, when you ask someone directly, it often sends them a message of, "Hey, I care and I'm noticing how much pain you're in."
Mhm.
So not being afraid to say, "Hey, I noticed you don't seem like you've been yourself lately," or and comment on what you are noticing. You've been out of touch, or maybe you've been avoiding things or not engaging in things you would normally enjoy. I'm noticing that, and I care about you. Think that's the other piece, to always express your concern and care. But then not to be afraid to say, sometimes when people behave in this way or when people feel overwhelmed by everything they're experiencing, they may have thoughts of wanting to end it or thoughts of suicide. And I'm wondering if you're having those kind of thoughts. I
Mhm.
think it's important to really listen and, to kind of let the person talk about whatever they're experiencing, and then to reassure them that there is help out there, that you may not know in the moment how exactly to get them help, but you're going to
Mhm.
help them find
Mhm.
it. That you're not going to leave them alone in this pain that they're in. You're going to work with them or help them find the help they need. And there are some resources that are really important. Things like the 988 number
Mhm.
the US, you can dial 988 from anywhere in the United States, and it will connect you to the National Suicide Crisis Lifeline so you can get help. Most of those calls are answered by a trained listener and get resolved just by talking, right? So I think a lot of times people are afraid to make that call because they worry that someone's going to show up on their doorstep, and that's not what happens. It actually
Mhm.
most of those calls are resolved by just having a trained listener, someone who can listen, point you in the direction of further help, and share some more resources with you. So,
Yeah.
just making sure people know they can call those numbers and that you can call with someone. So, if you're worried about someone, it's okay to help them reach out for help, whether that's looking up where they might find mental health providers or because when somebody's struggling, it's hard for them to do all of the steps. They
Yeah. It's
have
overwhelming to even search for a number. Yeah.
absolutely. And so anything you can do as a caring friend or loved one to help that person, it helps them relieve some of that pressure because it's hard for them to do it when they're not feeling well. And many times people who aren't feeling well or even thinking about suicide feel like they're already a burden to other people.
Mhm,
It's a distorted belief. We want them to know that not only are they not a burden, but that their life matters and that it's worth
mhm,
reaching out to get help and support.
mhm. Doreen, thank you so much for your time, and I'm really grateful the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention contacted me. I hope we can do more in the future with more time, but I'm really grateful that you put some time aside to talk to my listeners and to help them through this time of year that's really not easy for any of us, right?
Yeah, and we have some great resources on our website at afsp.org for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
Okay, I will have the website on my notes for sure. Thank you, Doreen. Have a great day.
Thank you.